kick us off here, and more folks will join as we go. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us tonight. We have a really exciting presentation planned, and I'm really looking forward to watching it and glad that you could all join us as well. So I'm going to begin tonight's presentation with a land acknowledgement. This webinar takes place on Ndakina, which translates to our homelands, that is now called New Hampshire and Vermont. Ndakina is the unceded traditional ancestral homelands and waterways of the Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land, water, air, flora, and fauna, and the human beings who have stewarded Ndakina throughout the generations for over 12,000 years. I also want to thank the New Hampshire Public Health Association for co-sponsoring this event. And I will be introducing our moderator for tonight, and that will be Dr. Carl Cooley. He is on the board of directors for New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, has some experience with forest bathing himself, and will be introducing our speaker for tonight. So Carl, I will pass things over to you.
Thanks, Emily, and welcome everyone. I've been looking forward to this webinar since, I don't know, since it was first planned, and I'm grateful for Christine to have joined us tonight. I enjoyed reading the Nature Fix a while ago, and it was the book for our Climate Bookworms book club recently, and so we're primed. But I want to introduce Christine Tappan, who serves on our advisory board at New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. Her bio tells me she's co-director of ABT Associates Global Center on Technical Assistance and Implementation, but she was previously Associate Commissioner in the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services and Director of Local Government Affairs at the American Public Human Services Association. She has both a bachelor's and master's degree in social work, the latter from the University of Michigan. And pertaining to tonight, she's a certified forest and nature therapy guide and trail consultant through the Association for Nature and Forest Therapists. She recently founded BirchWalking to bring all beings together, I think, her bio says, which makes sense, in nature to deepen connections that promote resiliency and capacity for all to thrive and live well. She provides guided forest therapy walks for individuals, families, groups, and teams, both in person and virtually. And she volunteers with the Old Growth Forest Network, and also has completed a certification in Workplace Mindfulness Facilitation through the Mindful Leader Institute at Brown University. So with that, I welcome Christine, and if you have questions while Christine is speaking, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll have a look at them at the end of her presentation, and certainly feel free to speak up when she's finished with your comments and questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Kauai Nandoba, thank you for the land acknowledgement, Emily. And I say to you in Abenaki, hello and welcome. Carl, I just will call out Florence Williams, the author of the Nature Fix, is actually a friend. She actually was in my cohort with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs, and we got certified as guides together. So her journey actually led her to become a certified forest therapy guide, and she's a really wonderful person. I love how she mixes science and her personal experience together. So I appreciate that acknowledgement because I've learned a great deal from her and many others. It's wonderful to be here with everyone tonight. This is going to feel a little bit like a short experience. I typically get the, I wish we had more time together when I guide and when I talk about forest bathing, because surprisingly, the reality many of us experience when we step into this conversation is the reality of that we have become disconnected from nature. And so I just encourage you, the first thing I have behind me, my plants that sit beside me every day in my office. I hope I hope for many of you, you have a window, someplace that you can look outside during the day, because number one, that's the best way to support your health and wellness. And I'll talk a little bit about tonight of how forest bathing can be a mix in our healthcare workers' self-care strategies, but it also can be things that we can encourage family, friends, colleagues to be doing honestly on a daily basis. So excited to be here and looking forward to your conversation and your questions. And I'm trying to move forward and it's not. So, oh, there we go. Great. So I am sharing an agenda with you tonight, a welcome to talk a little bit about us, not just me, but we're going to actually begin to engage together in just a moment about our experiences in nature. This picture is actually not me, but it actually looks like a trail that's near and dear to me in the Northwood Meadows State Park. I live in Northwood, New Hampshire, and this looks really similarly. I have a good friend on the call tonight. Her name's Dr. Susanna Fletcher, and she and I have walked this trail many times alone and with our dogs. And so I encourage you to think a moment about where do you go most often? And I'm going to suggest to you tonight to be thinking deeply about how you might connect in different ways with that space in nature that you might go to often. We're going to talk a little bit about each of us. I'm going to talk with you then about what is forest bathing? How might it fit in terms of self-care strategies for healthcare workers? Because the focus of my organization, which is called BirchWalking, is really to build the health and resiliency of New Hampshire's health and human service workforce. As someone who was a leader in our health and human service system here in New Hampshire, I really have seen, even before COVID, the unfortunate what's happening is we're losing a lot of wonderful people in the field because they don't have ways to refill their cup. And the typical self-care strategies are just not working for folks the way that they used to. And so I'm excited to share with you something that really gave me life again after I experienced secondary trauma, and I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. I hope it's something that I'm bringing to you that might become a new self-care strategy in your toolkit. We're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of forest bathing. I'm going to give you a look towards the research, which is growing rapidly. Super excited about that. It's growing here in the United States, and it's growing at even more rapid rates in Canada, the UK, and Korea and Japan, where it was founded. We're going to talk about how might you do forest bathing. And you can do this on your own, but I will really stress to you, it is much better when you do it with a guide who's creating a safe container for you to not worry about things like ticks, bears, coyotes, and all those other things out there, and is really giving you some prompts that are special and unique to the experience. I'm also going to talk about what forest bathing is not, because one of the things I hear when I encourage people to get into the forest is, oh yeah, I do that all the time. Well, it's a little bit different than strolling or hiking. And I'm going to talk about why it's different and how it's different. And then it's actually an evidence-based strategy. And to do it along the signs of a protocol, which most health and human service workers are familiar with the terminology of having protocols, right? Or standard approach to a practice. I'm going to talk about why it's important to try it with that context first, and then you can step yourself into doing it on your own. And then we'll have a little time for Q&A. All right, so I'm really excited. I'm going to share a little bit about me, and then I'm going to ask you to begin to share a little bit about yourselves in the chat. So I was someone who was deeply connected to nature when I was a child. I actually was a Girl Scout. I lived on a lake. I had forests all around me. My parents encouraged me. I wasn't someone, I am of the age where I didn't have social media and other pressures to be on technology that drew me away. My childhood was based in nature, really. And throughout my youth, I continued that. And in fact, I joined the Army in part because I knew I'd be out in the forest. And I spent a great deal of time as part of the US Army in Germany, in the forests and the woods, and it's beautiful. But as many of us, I came to experience what I now acknowledge is nature deficit disorder. I actually began to withdraw from nature. I spent more time in offices. Spent gradually more time in front of a computer. And I gradually really disconnected from nature. I didn't really view it as a place where I could refill my cup, where I could connect and actually have experiences that were deeply meaningful in my life. As a health and human service professional, one of the things we always need to be on the lookout for is, are we experiencing vicarious trauma? And are we, even more importantly, at a point where we may be burning out? And I've actually been able to travel the world talking about this. And in all honesty, though, I never thought about the forests of where they could help people and where they could be really a resiliency opportunity. As the Associate Commissioner at New Hampshire's Department of Health and Human Services about 4.5 years ago now, or 4 years ago now, I actually was really experiencing some fairly significant professional trauma and personal trauma. And those two things collided. And I stepped into talk therapy. I actually stepped towards EMDR, which folks may know is a really highly evidence-based therapy for people who have experienced trauma. But I just wasn't in a place to talk. My sympathetic system was on overload, and I literally couldn't settle down enough to talk. And so I decided I needed to get out and maybe go to camp. And I started to search for some way to go to an adult camp. And I happened upon an experience at Krapalu, which is out in the western part of Massachusetts in the Berkshire Mountains. And I came upon a 5-day forest therapy program. And I got there and literally I have shared with folks, within the first 24 hours, I felt differently. I actually began to be able to eat again and sleep again. And I actually began to come back into a better level of cognitive processing. And, you know, without going into that story, I was really in a pretty serious situation in terms of being able to function day to day in my workplace. And so I spent, after 5 days of being there, 6 hours a day, and also eating well and sleeping, certainly those things added to. But I came out of that experience changed, fundamentally changed. And I share with not hyperbole or saying it in a sort of extreme way. It saved my life. I really was on the brink of thinking I needed to leave health and human services, and I didn't want to. And so I decided at that time that I was going to find my way back to my roots. I discovered my tree type, which is a birch tree, which is a tree in the forest that doesn't live all that long. But what it does is it comes into the forest in the times when forests are often recovering or new forests, and it toils the soil. It really fertilizes it, and it is a place of building capacity for the future forest health. And so I've named my organization BirchWalking, and that's what I do with organizations in New Hampshire and honestly around the world. I've had the experience now of guiding people in Bangladesh and Thailand and Australia and other places around the world to really try to bring them to this practice. I experienced that forest therapy at Krapalu with an ANFT certified guide. Again, that's the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. And so I looked to that organization to possibly become certified. And I decided during COVID, I, like many others, decided it might be the time to try something new. And I got on and I became certified in forest therapy. It was a 7-month program with then an additional about 12 months of mentoring and more deeply guiding and really learning about it. And now I'm a permanently certified, internationally certified guide. And I'm really grateful for that experience. I also, along that journey, realized I'd had a practice of mindfulness for about 7 or 8 years. And I decided and realized that through the research, reading the research, that bringing together the practice of mindfulness in conjunction with nature connections like forest therapy was really the way to build the best experience for folks. So I also became certified as a workplace mindfulness facilitator through mindfulleader.org and Brown University. And then I also began to look towards how could I be a part of, I learned through the research and through my experience that really the best places to do forest bathing, to really get the optimal experience, which I'll tell you about, is in old growth forests. And the exciting news is we have some of those in New Hampshire still. So I became a volunteer with the Old Growth Forest Network, and I am actually the Rockingham County and Strafford County volunteer who works with a team of folks to identify and designate old growth forests in New Hampshire. And then I had the great opportunity to link up with New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, and it really rounded out my full experience. So with all of that in mind, I now want to turn to you, and I want to ask you to, in this moment, maybe settle in your chair just a little bit, or your seat, maybe you're standing, wherever you are, and just find a moment to get a little comfortable, and maybe even close your eyes or take a downward gaze, and just think for a moment about a tree that may have been special sometime in your life. Often this is a place where childhood harkens up. A tree that in some way might have been there for you at a point in your childhood or later in your childhood, or maybe it's a tree that's become special for you as an adult, perhaps at your own home or in a park that you frequent or by your work or someplace that you go often. And just think for a moment about that tree and maybe about your relationship with that tree. What has that felt like, or what has that made in terms of your ability to sort of calm and settle, your ability to feel playful? Just think for a moment about that. Okay, and now while I share with you my story briefly, I'm going to ask you in the chat to briefly mention your name. And then if you would share just maybe what kind of tree it was, where it was located, and perhaps a feeling that came upon you when you were with that tree. Okay, so as I mentioned, birch trees are very special to me now in adulthood. But when I was a child, I had a disability. I actually wore braces on my legs for several years, and I wasn't able to move as much as I want. I was a fast moving kid who was limited by braces that I wore on my legs. And so we had a tree near the lake that I grew up on, a little lake in Michigan. And my parents would bring me down to that lake and let me sit by the edge of the lake. And the willow tree dropped long, you know how the branches of a willow tree drop long down almost to the ground touching? I was literally able to reach up without getting up. I was able to reach up and play with that tree. And that tree enveloped me. It made me feel safe. I could smell it. I could touch it. It brought me comfort. It became a friend. And so I share that with you. I now own and am grateful to own a beautiful little property up in Ossipee, New Hampshire. And when I first saw this piece of property, the first thing that I was drawn to was a really gorgeous willow tree in the center that looks up at the top of a mountain and it looks over a river. And so I knew I felt a calling to that particular property. So I might ask if you begin to share in the chat a tree that felt really special to you and what experience you had with that tree. Okay. I'm going to let folks do that. And then I'm going to ask maybe Carl or Emily later. We'll come back to share a little bit of that. Okay. And as I move on, I'll just let folks do that with their time. Now I'm looking to move to the next slide. And my slide is not moving forward, Emily. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you great.
Let's see. Oh, there we go. Got it. All right. So I must just have a little delay. So as folks are thinking about that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why we feel this deep connection to nature, particularly to trees. And if you look at this, I mean, I was profoundly affected when I saw some of these images. So for me, the one that hit me the most was a thumbprint. For others, it's the picture of the lung that's associated with, as you look up at trees in the sky and you see their branches the connection with, the way that we breathe. The thumbprint is so, if you look down at a tree that's just been cut, or even a stump that, has maybe even been there a long time, you can see those rings of life, which is just like our thumbprint. And then I often refer to the tree of life. I don't know about you, but I have little symbols, I have a necklace, and I have other things. And to think about that being sort of how our nervous system and even our brain actually looks very similar in imaging. So the point here is that we are nature. Nature is us. We're all connected. And sure, I'm certain probably many of you know that we're made up of, is it 70% water, right? We're made up of carbon like trees. We have a lot of association, and we are deeply genetically connected. This is where we come from. And, the reality is we don't often take a pause to think about that connection. And even more so when we're communicating and we're collaborating with each other in our health and human services workspaces, we are communicating just like trees in a forest are, just like fungi, like mushrooms, like toadstools, like all that lovely soil. It's all communicating together. There's a wonderful book by Susan Simard that is called The Mother Tree. And she's actually, I call her a reformed logger. I think she's referred to herself that way as well. She's someone who grew up in a logging family and really wound up having an epiphany about what she was doing to nature and what she wasn't taking responsibility for in terms of her ability to benefit nature, not harm nature. And she's done deep science about how trees talk to each other, how really the soil, the way that these little, I won't go into all the technical, but really how the microorganisms are talking with each other and communicating with each other. They're giving signals of protection and signals of concern, and they're sharing actually ways to protect each other from diseases, from things that can harm each other. And if we think about it in organizations, which is part of what I do with BirchWalking, I come in and I think about how do teams of people interact with each other? How do organizations and systems interact with each other? And how can we better tap the wisdom of nature to help us be resilient and oftentimes heal the dynamics that we have in our workplace? So my passion is around bringing nature to folks in the health and human services field as a part of the milieu of our self-care strategies. So I'm curious, as you look at this, these are the typical types of self-care strategies as health and human service workers that we look towards. So we take vacations, we spend time with our animals, we go out and exercise. It's important that we're clear on our boundaries in the workplace, right? It's important that we have hobbies, and then we think spiritually what draws us to things, and we sleep and we eat well and all those kinds of things. But what's missing here is something around nature. And I put a star in the center about where could forest therapy or nature connected wellness be in your self-care strategies. And I'm really hoping that if you haven't tried it yet, you'll think about it as you go forward after tonight's conversation. So I wanted to just touch on this nature deficit disorder phenomenon. And Richard Louv is a pretty incredible person who about a couple of decades ago began to raise this question, particularly as it relates to children. He was really the first one who said, whoa, wait a minute. Are we really looking at how much less time our children and our grandchildren, the children of our world, are spending less good time in nature and much more time behind screens? So as I shared my story with you about my history with nature, lots of children don't have that foundation to look back on. I've reconnected because I had experiences I could touch back to. It is not unusual, and I've been a special education teacher in my work as a social worker. I've done a lot of work with kids, and it's not unusual to talk to children who've literally never played outside. It's not something that they have experienced safety around, that they've experienced curiosity or play around. And so, and even I will share just a quick snippet. I was on the school board in my local town, and I still to this day, I was asked recently, what's the most important experience you had of being on a school board? And I said, voting to save recess. We have, we've had an attack on recess in the last 2 decades in our school systems, where people want to reduce it and spend more time in the classroom studying subjects. And what the research is really showing us is that the best thing we can do for our kids to really look towards helping them to lower issues of anxiety, to help to manage depression, to really increase their attention spans and move away from these addictions to electronics, is to get them outside. And so I look to Richard Liu as one of the folks that I really think about when I think about how to bring nature-connected wellness to my health and human services colleagues. So what is forest bathing? It is this is an experience of forest bathing. This can be one of the things you can do. It's not being naked in the woods, which sometimes I get that. And just so you know, forest therapy and forest bathing are used somewhat interchangeably, but actually they're beginning to separate, because in Canada, the UK, and in Asia, particularly Japan and Korea, they're actually beginning to prescribe forest therapy. They're giving prescriptions to parks. They're waiving fees, sometimes for a year or longer, and they're prescribing, find a forest therapy guide and go out. So there's actually a new level of practitioner capability that's coming into this space. So forest bathing is called Shinrin Yoku. That is the English translation of a Japanese term that literally means forest and bathing. And if we think about what forest and bathing are, they are really the experience of, if you think of taking a bath in water, it's the same thing. It's the full immersion in the forest. It's opening all of your senses. And we have more than just 5 senses. We actually have spatial senses. I won't get into all of them tonight, but it's really this idea of opening all of your senses. And I sometimes make people uncomfortable with using the words like forest bathing is a very sensual experience. It's a very intimate experience. And you're not really forest bathing if you're not getting in a space that might be a little uncomfortable. And so I share that with you because to really engage in it, you're going to open up your smell, your sounds, your the way that you feel and you relate spatially to the forest, tactily, what are you touching? A whole variety of things. And we're not going to get the full experience tonight, but one of the things I'm going to offer up, I mentioned to Emily and Carl, is an opportunity to come and go forest bathing with me. And I'm excited about this. I'll share that this picture here was a beautiful pond in the Northwood Meadows State Park. And I was actually there the last day that this pond was full. Unfortunately, because of our infrastructure issues here in New Hampshire, the dam that was put in place here burst the next day, and this pond is now drained down to just a trickle of a little river, which has had an effect on the communities that are around this area. So where does forest bathing come from? So the origins of forest bathing are fairly recent. It was coined in the 1980s in Japan. It was raised as something some folks may be familiar. Culturally, Japan has been deeply connected both religiously and spiritually to nature. And it was always a constant. It's always been a constant in the people of Japan's lives. And in the 1980s, they had this convergence of a deep economic recession that really lasted more than a full decade. And at the same time, people were being brought into the workplace and really the workplace, sort of the intensity of longer hours and being in front of computers collided with this financial pressure and cultural change. And so there was a call to really look towards opportunities. They actually had an escalation in healthcare issues. So things like increases in heart disease, diabetes, chronic illnesses began to really escalate in Japan. And at the same time, their suicide rate issues of anxiety and depression began to escalate as well. And there was a call to try to go out to nature as one of the potential remedies. The good news is it was actually led by a doctor, someone who didn't really know a lot about forests, but he himself had experienced it. Dr. Ching Li, you can actually find lots of YouTube videos and interviews with him with CBS News and other popular news media, but he is a deep researcher in this area. And he got funding to initiate the first forest therapy study groups by the 1990s and the early 2000s. And what he was finding was there was a reaction to the kinds of things that trees and nature itself, the soil, is emitting. It's called phenicides. We know it more commonly as the elements of essential oils, but there are things coming off the trees and out of the soil that when we breathe them in and we take them in our skin, we actually interact with them, we experience changes in reduced levels of cortisol, increased levels of dopamine. We literally, our bodies begin to change, they begin to shift. And what he noticed was that there were optimal dosages to get this reaction. So as little as 15 to 20 minutes a day in being in nature can last a week for you. And 2 to 3 hours can last a month. And so he began to deeply study this. Initially, the studies were done on men, Japanese men, and he gradually moved this to other women and to different ages and people experiencing different kinds of health conditions and social conditions. And literally, you can go to Japan right now and to Korea, and you enter a forest therapy trail, and they actually swab your mouth to take a level of, to take your saliva and test that. They take your blood pressure. They may even draw blood. And then they test that when you exit. And then they test it up to 30 days afterwards. And they've literally gathered hundreds of thousands of studies of where people have experienced immediate results, immediate benefits, and then benefits that extend over time. What he also learned is that urban forests are really good. It's the better that we can, as little as a tree, even in the middle of a very busy city like Tokyo, has benefits to sit and be with that tree. The best benefits, though, come from old growth forests. And why is that? Because those phenicides are more deeply entrenched in older trees. They haven't been disturbed. They have a heightened ability to give off the kinds of things that we need. But what also comes from old growth forests is more sights and sounds and smells. So there are literally things like fractals in nature that we don't see immediately, but I have plants behind me here. And if I turn over the back leaf of a plant, I see all the webs in the plant, right? And if you think about that, those are fractals that we're taking in our brains, and they're actually helping us to organize our thoughts. Meanwhile, I'm smelling the soil in my plants. I'm taking in something there. I'm feeling the awe of the beauty, the greenery that is with me. All of these things, the pitter patter of rain, the movement of water, they all have an impact on our brain and our bodies because we are innately connected to nature. And this is what I found so exciting when I learned about the research. And so what are the health benefits of forest bathing? It literally has been fully documented now. There is tons of research articles that shows reduced blood pressure, alleviating stress, increasing our immune function. So when COVID hit, there was a series of 11 universities connected to a forest bathing organization in the UK. And they began to study the impact on COVID. And they are now engaged in a large study there with people with long COVID symptoms. And they're finding that being in nature, forest bathing specifically, increases your natural killer cells in your body, which both affect viruses in your body and help boost your immune system. It also actually creates barriers to cancer. And so this is where it's so exciting that we might have this low cost, really good for us and fun ability to take in something all on our own, not medications, right? Not having to go to a therapist necessarily, although not to minimize therapy. It's a good thing too. But we have this ability to potentially affect our own well-being by simply doing what this person is doing right here, taking in all of nature. So I'm excited to share with you this. These are pictures literally from my property in Ossipee. I'm in the process of getting this trail certified for forest bathing. I'm actually a trail consultant with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides. And I did that, I'll tell you later, because there's so few certified trails in the United States. I'm sharing some reflections with you. This is actually a nonprofit organization in the Lakes region. I'm guiding, these are people that I am guiding where they're in an organization that, like many of you on the phone today from wherever you're coming from, I'm sure if you're a health and human service professional, COVID was like nothing we'd ever experienced before. Not only did we have to go virtual, some people had to stay in person and experience all the stresses and the fears of getting COVID, bringing it to our own families, all of those kinds of things. And then we could see the effect on children and families and vulnerable populations and communities. So this is on my property. It abuts two beautiful rivers, the Bear Camp River and the Shakora River, both that come out of the mountains of New Hampshire and will go all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. And this is a trail. They're doing something I'll share with you. It's called an invitation of what's in motion, where I'm encouraging them to notice what's moving around them as we move through the forest. The other person is sitting. I'll share with you in a moment. One of the most powerful things we can do is create a sit spot in something, our own backyard, where we go out a couple of times a week and just sit and be with nature to take in everything that's around us. So these are actual quotes from people that have experienced this with me. So what forest bathing is not, and this is really important, because just being in nature is not the same as forest bathing. It isn't hiking. When we hike and we have a destination, and it's great for us, I'm on the pursuit of the 48 4,000 footers. I also do the 52 with a view, and I love the 10 beautiful mountains of the Ossipee Valley. So I'm someone who loves those kinds of pursuits and goals, but it's not the same as forest bathing. Forest bathing innately is about slowing down. And when you're hiking, we don't usually slow down, we're speeding up. It's not exercising. So it's not, a trail running. It's not cross-country skiing, which I love to do too. It also isn't a naturalist walk. When you go forest bathing with you, I'm not spending time identifying trees. I do identify poison ivy, because I don't want you to get, I don't want anybody to get connected to poison ivy, but that's not what we're doing. And it's not necessarily meditating in the woods, although that can be good for you. And importantly, it's not group therapy in the woods. Although walking with a therapist could be a good thing. Walking on a trail, that's a nice thing, but it's not forest bathing. Forest bathing is innately something that comes with an experience that must open all your senses. So as a trained guide, I'm taught that I am the guide and the forest is the therapist. The forest is your therapist. The person in this picture is someone who is a health and human service professional, works at one of our mental health centers here in New Hampshire. And she is sitting alongside that lake, that pond here in Northwood that unfortunately drained the next day. But this was an experience I had with her, and she allowed me to share a picture of her. Forest therapy is something that I bring a standard sequence, or what we call commonly a protocol. I follow 5 elements that really invite you to open your senses. And what I'm doing is I'm monitoring the environment to stay safe for you. So I'm literally on the lookout for making sure the trail is safe in its infrastructure. You're not going to trip and fall. There's not, terrible poison ivy. There are rails if there's moving down to a lakeside. I'm also keeping an eye out for predators. So I'm keeping an eye out for coyotes and bobcats, which we're seeing a lot more in New Hampshire. Bear sightings, moose who might be aggressive. That's my job. And I'm trained in wilderness first aid, as I mentioned. So I'm there if someone has a reaction, if there's an accident, if anything happens, I'm there to be trained. And so these are the kinds of things that set you up to be able to be really focused on just relaxing and coming into your senses. You're presented with a series of invitations, and that's exactly what they are. They're simply invitations. You don't have to do exactly what I suggest you do. And in fact, it's very open, and it's intended to open you up to play, to bring you back to experiences of childhood, perhaps, or a time that you had fun in nature. And we also, as I mentioned, we really strive to create a space that you might go, this is the right sit spot for me. This person I know actually goes back to this spot often when she has the time. And as I mentioned, I actually have a spot in my backyard that I go to, just down into the edge of my forest. It's safe enough to my house. I always tell someone where I'm going, and I really try to sit about 20 minutes a day, as much as I can. Usually it's around 3 to 5 days a week. At the end of each of these invitations, we have a sharing circle. And in that sharing circle, we go around through a different kinds of ways that I'll prompt that. And we offer you the opportunity to share what you're noticing. There's no judgment. There's no right and wrong. And you can actually pass. You can just say, I passed this time. Even quietly or silently, you can signal that. And the idea is to come close to a place where you are in nature and you are really feeling that experience. And certainly there are benefits in a group to experiencing it together and hearing what others are in awe of or what they've experienced. Simply being in nature and sitting and noticing is the goal. And again, this is someone actually on a forest therapy experience. She looks pretty relaxed to me. And that's really what you're supposed to get to. And then the forest bathing experience actually culminates in a lovely, and I'll be honest, one of my very favorite parts of it, a tea ceremony. So again, hearkening to the roots of this coming from the Asian culture, where tea is incredibly special, and it's a place where people convene and come together. We bring you together in what's called a closing ceremony, a closing circle. And we share our reflections, gifts that we've experienced from our time in nature. And we really think about how nature can nurture us and nurture others. The idea here is to really leverage the collective experiences. And I've shared a couple of quotes with you. And again, this is on the picture in the lower corner, and you can see me in the hat. I'm actually reflecting with folks who are literally sitting and looking over the corner of the Bear Cab River up in the Ossipee area. And I'll just add, those are hemlock benches that were literally cut from trees that fell on the land that I own. And we created benches from them. So just trying to stay really deeply with nature. All right. And then just a touch on the trails. I mentioned just a little bit. So these are a couple of other views from the trails that I have. So where you saw the tea ceremony, there's the river. So at the property I have in Ossipee, and wherever you can find water and be with water, it really is an important element of the forest bathing experience. Here's somebody who, she actually has pants on and she went right down into the river because that's what she felt called to. We really try to bring people into an open air experience. So you're not just deep in the forest, you're also in spaces where you can see the sky and be with the sky. You know, how many of you, when was the last time you laid on your back and looked up the sky and admired the clouds and the trees above you? Those are the kinds of things. I guess this time of year, you'd probably be making a snowman, right, with your arms and legs. So this is me with a group. This is also a little picture of my entryway to my trail. Obviously, I mentioned I'm BirchWalking. And so this is a birch arboretum, again, off felled trees on my land. We created this way to enter into, it's actually called the threshold of connection that you pass through as you come to the experience with me. So forest therapy trails are really built to make sure that they're safe, first and foremost, they're accessible. And I'm really looking to build universally accessible. So I'm building a trail that is intended eventually for people in walkers, people in wheelchairs, people with mobility issues. They're also intended to recognize the ecosystem health and to not put more pressure on nature. So they're really intended, like you can see in the trail there, that it has some mulch. That is actually mulch that is not treated. It's simply mulched hemlock and cedar. And I literally go to a gardener, to a landscaping business that I know has not treated it. And I put that down. That actually helps as an insecticide, and certainly so that, you know, things don't grow up in the trail. But I want to make sure I'm not doing any harm, particularly as it's right next to the watershed. So here's the elements of forest therapy trails, something for you to think about. Maybe you have a trail near you that you might like to have looked at, assessed, that maybe it could become a forest therapy trail. And if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to connect with you around it. And just as we wrap up, we're kind of on our last couple of slides here, and then we'll open up for questions and sharing. When you're getting ready for a forest bathing experience, here are some of the things you want to really think about. You don't want to have electronics with you. And I'll just share one of the things I came right up against when I went on my first experiences. I wear hearing aids, and how I control the sound of hearing aids is actually through my phone. And so I had to really make a difficult decision about what I was going to do with my hearing aids and what I was going to do with my phone, because I could feel myself gravitating to wanting to take pictures. And that's not what you want to do, right? You're not with nature when you're taking with pictures, right? And so I encourage folks, I learned to just set my hearing aids at a certain level, and then I put my technology away. And you just have to trust that I'm there to make sure that you're safe. And if you need to reach out to someone, I'm going to help you to do that. You also really want to allow yourself to be spontaneous. And I find this to be one of the biggest difficulties for my health and human service colleagues, to just let things flow. We're used to really organizing our day, scheduling our time, knowing what we're supposed to accomplish with the people that we're working with, that we're caring for, that we're providing services to. So it's really important to like try to free yourself. And I've often had people come with me 2 and 3 times for a forest bathing experience, because the first time they could feel themselves like on the verge of getting to the spontaneous point towards the end of the experience. And so they came again, and then they were able to kind of let their hair down a little bit more the next time. Remembering that forest bathing is not a hike. I'm often slowing people down when I'm out there with them. And I have methods, I have ways that I do that quite purposefully, but it's not a hike. And then really thinking about how can you open all your senses. We as human beings have become overly dependent on vision and touch, and we're losing our sense of smell. In the book, The Nature Fix, Florence does an amazing job talking about the research around our senses and what's the status of the human senses. And because we're not in fight and flight so much, which is good, but we're not using our senses as much. And so the problem is we're not able to tune into those, and they're not giving our body some of the good messages that they could be giving them. The goal is to really pause and take in the forest through those senses, and to really get them all out there, be open to them all. One of the things that is often really interesting is that people want to chat. They're either there with a colleague or a friend, and they don't slow down enough to actually just be in nature. So we really have to discourage people from chatting until we get to the sharing circle, and then that's time. And then last, thinking about being flexible and finding creative ways to make forest bathing a part of your ongoing life experience. And so for the last word today, I just want to share a little bit of, I love this one. It's something I honestly saw on Facebook, and I thought it was just kind of a beautiful quotation from trees. So think a little bit about what trees can offer you and what they might be able to share with you. And then I'm very open. And again, I just have to admire this picture of the Northwood Meadows Pond. This was really an important place for people during COVID, and it was very sad so I love to look at this as it refills my memories. And so I'd like to open up now with a little support from Carl and Emily about the kinds of questions you might have, and certainly any of your experiences we might want to reflect on in terms of a tree that has been special to you in your life. And Emily, if it's okay, I'm just going to stop sharing too and open it up.
Absolutely.
All right. So where would we like to begin, Carl?
Well, Christine, thank you so much. That was really, really a wonderful presentation, and I'm ready for ready for an outing with you anytime.
Terrific.
I looked through all of people's reflections, and I'm happy to ask them if they want to share their comment about a particular tree or experience. But there were maple, black walnut, birch, white pine, mulberry, ash, willow, spruce. There were a lot of different trees mentioned.
We
Some
have
of
a
them
we have a
mentioned more than
forest we have
once.
a forest with us right here, right? Here we
Yeah,
have
I
our
was just thinking it sort of created a forest with all of those thoughts. But I want to be sure we have time for people's actual questions. And
Sure.
I think that one of the ones I have, somebody, Reb, I think Mackenzie mentioned whether it was
Mhm.
safe if clothing that's being treated to repel ticks was safe. And it prompted me to sort of observe that the word ticks didn't come up in your
Oh, I said it
talk.
early on. Yeah,
Eh,
that it is. Yeah,
Did you?
no, it's
Maybe I missed it.
yeah, no. I just touched on it very lightly, but absolutely. In New Hampshire, it is unequivocally one of the most important things we have to be conscientious of. And I'll be honest, I've experienced my own tick phobia. I probably, like many folks, I've done my tetracycline bout, here and there. And so it's really, it's quite serious. I really encourage, so before anybody goes on experience with any forest bathing guide, you're gonna get some instructions about how to prepare for that experience, and they're gonna really encourage you to dress for the experience. So it is really important. I don't typically guide, I'll be honest, in July and August, and even very late June. Once it gets really hot and there's a lot of bugs, and why I don't do that is because I want people, if possible, to wear either wear tall socks or long pants, tuck them into their socks. I actually purchase things that I either sell right on the spot or just give people if they don't have anything, like bracelets that can go around your wrists, things that can go around your ankles that have safe repellent on it. It is a choice whether you go like kind of the less sort of what we know now harmful way to keep ticks away from you. There's all sorts of natural repellents all the way up to DEET. And some people, they're only going to feel comfortable if for that time period, they spray themselves with DEET. There's a lot of great products coming out, which is the good news. And I also, the other reason I use cedar and hemlock on my trail is actually it's going to reduce the ticks and the insects in that space. So it's really important to make sure that you feel safe. Poison ivy is the other fear that people have. And I've learned a lot more about poison ivy. Be careful in the winter. Lots of people get poison ivy in the winter. We don't realize that those vines are on trees and we go to hug them. And I actually heard about somebody who got poison ivy on their face, not realizing that those vines still give off the sap or the little elements, the oils, and you can get poison ivy in the winter. So we prep you and we prepare you. We offer you those resources on the spot, and we don't take anybody out into the forest unless you feel safe.
Christine, there's a question. Stacy Brown, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question about certifying trails? If you're still here.
I see. I'd like to know how to certify a trail. So it's a pretty extensive process. I'll just go ahead and share. So I took an additional course through ANFT. I also have a mentor, someone who actually is a forester, actually works for the National Park Service in the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. So she's an expert. She is a trail builder. I'm not a trail builder. I'm actually working on a large project up in Maine right now. Somebody who actually owned 500 acres and is building a wellness retreat. And they reached out to me when they saw that I was both a forest bathing guide and a trail consultant. And I've actually worked with them from scratch, which has been quite exciting. But I work alongside a trail builder. And what we're doing is we're working on all those elements that I showed on the slide. So safety is also always first and foremost. So how do you have safe entrances? What are the kinds of people? What's the accessibility level? How do you make sure you're not harming nature as you cut a trail through the forest? How do you have the elements for a good forest bathing trail as well? It's a pretty extensive, I have about a 15-page assessment that I work through with the landowners. And we also do state and local parks. National parks are now beginning to get certified forest therapy trails. So we work with landowners and land managers to actually really create all the kinds of things you need, which includes signage. So we give guidance, directions. We literally can give invitations on the signage. We also look to adapt those to people who might have hearing or sight issues, if they might be being guided by someone else who needs instructions. So those are all the kinds of things that we look at. It's a pretty intensive process, but I have to tell you, it's brought me to a different level of really understanding how to create a great experience for people, particularly keeping them safe and reducing their fear of being in nature. Because just to mention, I didn't go into it deeply tonight, but the reality is that there are many populations and cultures that don't have positive experiences in their backgrounds. Particularly Black Americans and Native American Indians don't always have positive nature experiences. And so it's really thinking about how do we make sure that we acknowledge those and really think about the cultural implications, individual experiences, past traumas that people might bring, and really think through those as deeply as possible before we take someone out on a trail.
Great. Let me look at
I see this one from Deborah about where do you learn about the old growth forest?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that one.
Yeah,
So
great. I'd love to touch on that one. So there are a couple of different ways. So there is an organization called the Old Growth Forest Network. There are also, and so you can go online, you can Google them, and we need more volunteers in New Hampshire. So if you're up for it, and it is an amazing group of people that I get to interact with. So I'm interacting with some of our lead foresters and conservationists in New Hampshire. We're actually, I'll just put a little plug. We are actually having a conference next September, or this coming September, at Geneva Point, in Moultonborough, New Hampshire, on Lake Winnipesaukee, where there is 1 mile of beachfront. And I will be forest bathing guiding, along with Florence Williams will be there. And also a wonderful woman, one of my instructors with the ANFT, a woman named Nadine Mazzola, who wrote a book called Forest Bathing with Your Dog, which if we had more time, I'd talk to you about my dog, George, who loves to go forest bathing with me. So it's really wonderful to, be able to be a part of identifying this. So one of the most gorgeous ones I've been in is on the back of Mount Sunapee. There's a part on Mount Sunapee. If you go up through the campground at the back of the ski area, you go into a place, it literally feels like you are in Lord of the Rings, like you are in a deep, quiet, moist, green forest. It's just beautiful. Actually, Pawtuckaway is on Pawtuckaway Forest over in, where's that at? Help me out. Raymond. It's actually on our list. Big Pines, which is up in Tamworth, and I'm looking to guide there. Big Pines is a beautiful park. We have about right now, about a dozen in process of either having been designated or getting designated here in New Hampshire. Oh, thank you, Emily. That's great.
Well, we've come up on 7 o'clock. Maybe one more question, if Christine, if you've seen another one that you wanted to particularly comment about.
Yeah, I did see a question about how to get certified. Here's the wonderful news. There are many accrediting bodies around the country. My future partner in BirchWalking, Dr. Susanna Fletcher, is on the call here with us today. I asked her to join us, and she's actually going through the ANFT certification process right now. And I think she graduates in April, Sue, is that right? March or April? Yep. And then what you do after that is you go to a deep immersion for 4 days. And you can go all around the world to do that, which is super cool. And then you're permanently certified. There are other certifications though that you can get in Canada, the UK, out of other parts of Europe, even Australia now. The thing that I found is that ANFT is at the roots of forest bathing in the United States and around the world. Almost every one of those other organizations were people who were originally trained by ANFT, and they went off to adapt the process in different ways. So as I mentioned, it's beginning to be prescribed in Europe and Canada and Asia. And so they're taking it to a practitioner level where they're actually incorporating more mental health approaches, mindfulness approaches. It's kind of bringing it up a little bit of a level. And so, you know, I encourage you to look towards ANFT. It's fairly affordable. It's a wonderful process. It's a wonderful learning experience. And then you can also decide if that's enough for you or if you'd like to go on to something more significant.
I think we should probably wrap up. This has been fantastic. Christine, is BirchWalking a URL also for
It is.
their
And
organization?
yep, it's www.birchwalking.earth. So just as a little tidbit, yes. So when you get a .earth URL, you're actually contributing through donations to conservation causes around the world. So I have a .earth.